So, welcome to the show. This is a short series entitled The Four Monster Stress Busters. And these are the four things that I've found over the years, over most of my life, to be the most effective and in some ways the easiest to use, particularly on ourselves, but also with other people. And it doesn't even matter if we're not therapists. We're interacting within our family with people all the time, and these techniques are pretty universal. In the first show, we talked about havening. That's become a lot more well known since Justin Bieber and his partner, or one of them, said that Justin uses this quite a lot to help him with some of the things that he lives with. And then that's a psychosensory technique. It involves stroking your arms, amongst a few other things. And then the second monster, which we talked about last week, was heart math, which is really a form of breathing and definitely a form of meditation. And today we're going to be talking mainly, but I mean, there is no script for this. Who knows where this journey might take us? But the plan is we're going to be talking about healing and also self-healing, which falls into the same categories as the other one. And there's beginning to be a few links formed here, because I mentioned that heart math is a form of meditation. Definitely havening can be a meditative practice. Healing certainly can. And the fourth monster, which we talk about next week, also falls in. So we're actually sort of building ourselves a cocktail. And the program after the four monsters is going to be where I talk about universal or infinite intelligence. People have different words for that, but that's where it gets really exciting, and where we recognize that whilst these four monsters, these friendly monsters, are great to have on our side, actually they're just entry points or sort of band-aids to take us to something far more powerful. And if I wanted to do that, in the first program, we wouldn't have got there, because I know that this is a journey. We have to take a few little steps on the way. We have to prepare our unconscious mind, and we have to open up some curiosity and excitement about these things. Now, 2 or 3 days ago, which is when I really start thinking about putting the show together, I thought I'd better sort of find out how many types of healing there are. So I go to my good friend Wikipedia, and I know you've got to be careful about that, but it's still a really, really good reference source. And I went into meltdown, basically, because there's so many kinds of healing that we could talk about. And then when you get into psychotherapy, which is listed as a healing, there's about 250 different branches of psychotherapy. So that tells me really that there definitely isn't a magic bullet here, because if there were, that's all you would see. And again, I think it demonstrates that we all find our own entry point. We all find the philosophy, the thoughts, the disciplines, the methods, the techniques that we feel most comfortable with. And because we're all different, we'll all have different choices. So these are my four, and I'm not saying they're the only four. I'm not even saying they're the best four, but they're the best four that I've found. And what's particularly good about them is that you can start to use all of these things pretty much immediately. So you don't have to spend a load of money and a load of time getting trained for these things, with certain provisos, which I will always mention as we go along. So a source that I did go to, that I did find refreshing, and in fact it was not new information, I was just reminding myself, and it's the person who's regarded as the father of medicine, and his name is Hippocrates, and he was born about 2,500 years ago, and this is what he says on the subject. He says, "Everyone has a doctor in him or her. We just have to help it in its work. The natural healing force within each one of us is the greatest force in getting well." Now, I particularly like that, first of all, because when you become a doctor, as I did quite a few years ago, when you qualify, you have to say the Hippocratic Oath. So he is the father figure to us. Although now, if I think you can do a United Nations charter or something like that. It probably varies a lot now, but that's how it was when I qualified anyway. And it, last week, as well, every week at the moment for all of us is interesting. And in some ways it's all the same because we're in lockdown and we're confined more than we normally would be. But also every week is different. And this week in particular, the thing that stuck in my head literally was I had what people call an earworm or an ear grub. And it's when you get this kind of tune in your head and you just can't get it out of your head. It goes round and round and round. And for a few days, I found this really irritating and distracting. And then I realized yesterday or the day before that perhaps I'd better, rather than trying to block this thing out, I'd better try and explore it a little bit. And it's not even a song, really. Well, it is, it's in a song. And some of you will know immediately what it is. And the words are, I'm not going to sing it, there's a crack where the light gets in. There is a crack where the light gets in. And if you don't know that, that's from Leonard Cohen, from his song, The Anthem. And I was lucky enough to see him in Lisbon on one of his last shows before he sadly passed away. He didn't finish till about 3 o'clock in the morning, by the way. So I have a feeling that he knew he wouldn't be coming back to Lisbon. So I've been thinking about that. There's a crack where the light gets in. Now, light is a word that we use in many different senses. We certainly use it. It's very much a spiritual world. People talk about being enlightened, or people talk about the Illuminati, and the Buddhists talk about being awakened. So there is some sort of philosophical, some sort of spiritual gateway through which, if we're very lucky, we can enter. But it says, Leonard, what the word there is, there's a crack where the light gets in. So what does that mean if there isn't a crack? Does it mean we don't have any light? I guess it could mean that. We won't know, will we? But the kind of, in my experience of the people that I work with, and myself as well, I always say to people, we don't learn anything. We don't move forward very much usually when things are going well. Normally, we make the greatest insights when things are not going very well, because we're challenged with a different set of circumstances, and we have to literally get outside of our comfort box. And often that can propel us to a much higher level than we thought possible. We usually don't notice that at the time, but it's when we're looking back. And that's why when people talk about these kind of things, they often say, if I could change any of that, I wouldn't change it. And they really mean it. You can tell by looking in their eyes, they really mean they wouldn't change it. So it takes a shock to the system for most people before they start to think of things in a different way. And hopefully, I don't need to give anybody a shock, but just a little gentle nudge and put a few ideas to you. And as always, my ideas are coming from my unconscious mind to your unconscious minds. If I was just using my conscious mind now and only addressing your conscious minds, then it would become more of a sort of a debate. It may be like reading an academic paper. And I don't think any of us would probably change our views on anything as a result of that. So it'd be pretty boring, and certainly be pretty boring to the unconscious mind. So I asked for comments because I know there are people who are therapists who are on this show, and we all know what healing is one way or another. We wouldn't be in this business if we didn't think that we could help people with stuff. We wouldn't bother learning this stuff if we didn't think we could help ourselves with this stuff. And certainly, looking back, whenever I've had any, bad setbacks, unfortunately, I haven't had too many, but they felt bad enough at the time. So I'm just going to share a couple of them with you and what steps they took me on. When I was fairly newly qualified, been a doctor just for a few years, I enjoyed medical school. I so often look back and wonder how I managed to qualify, but I did. Um, and that was because there were some things that really fascinated me. And I didn't work at them. I was just around the hospital the whole time. I was like a sponge soaking stuff up. So I put in lots of hours in hospitals and in casualty departments and operating theatres. And I didn't put many hours in lecture theatres because I was a bit too busy for that. So I was also working in the music industry. And I was also working on a BRMB radio. I was the rock show correspondent. I had hair then, so if I went to a rock show now, I don't imagine that they would let me in. But anyway, they did in those days, and what's better, they gave me free tickets. But anyway, moving on from that, I mentioned I played a lot of sport, and I had a back problem, and this can happen to people, and it just got worse and worse. And it got to such a point where actually all of the physical activities that I enjoyed doing, gradually they were all being taken away from me. And it was a lady on the checkout at the supermarket who probably changed my life. She doesn't know that, and I wish I probably told her. I should have gone back. But I couldn't carry the groceries. And she said, you need to go and see that man in Troon, Jan de Vries. He was very famous then, and I'm sure many people know about him now. And I went to see him, and he didn't really ask me what I wanted. He just gave me some acupuncture, stuck pins in my back and down my leg. And I wasn't greatly impressed. You know, I am a doctor, and certainly I didn't know anything about acupuncture. I was hoping he might maybe do some massage or something, but no. And I got home, and I didn't feel any different. And I thought, well, that was a complete waste of time and money. It didn't cost me a lot of money, but I suppose probably, you know, felt like it at the time. But what happened when I woke up the next morning, that changed my life, because I was able to jump out of bed and I didn't have any pain. And I started to get my mobility back. And because I've got an inquiring mind, I wanted to know immediately, you know, what has happened. So I found ways to get myself trained in acupuncture. And I was one of the first doctors in the UK to be trained. And in fact, within a year, I became a trainer of doctors myself. That feels like a long time. Actually, it doesn't feel like a long time ago. And I wanted to set up my own practice. And as all of us do, we try and find rooms. We try and find a premise where we can have our office. And I found this place, which was called a holistic healing center. So I went along, and it was run by a man and wife. I thought they were old. They weren't actually, looking back, they were just middle-aged. But to me then, they looked old. And they said, what do you actually do? And I said, well, you know, I treat people with acupuncture. Well, what do you do? I put pins in them. And they said, no, what do you do? I said, well, I can't say any more than I've just said. And so they looked at each other exasperated, and they said, he's a healer and he doesn't know it. Are you a healer? And I said, no. And I tell you, I almost had a panic attack, and I left, and I never took rooms there, because that word, it scared me. I probably didn't know what a healer was then, which is a bit of a shame, because it would have saved me a lot of time and effort. If I just actually had a thought about, well, you know, what did this man do with his needles? What, you know, I mean, I knew when I was doing acupuncture, I recognized fairly soon, it doesn't really matter where you put the pins. I'll get really criticized by the bodies for saying that, so that's not advice to you. My experience was that it didn't really matter too much. They had to be acupuncture points, but many of them were related to where the nerves, you know, run anyway. So, you know, any person who's had some knowledge of anatomy would know that, and they would know which were the safe ones and which weren't. And a long time, quite a few years went by, and I had another medical problem. I don't normally get medical problems, and you know them all now after this one. I don't exactly know how it happened, but I developed really bad pains in my shoulder. And I was working in Africa, in challenging locations. I had to have rigorous medical exams every year. And it got to the stage where travel was becoming increasingly difficult, and jumping in and out of helicopters and carrying stretchers and all that kind of stuff was getting really difficult, and I wasn't sleeping much. And I have a feeling that some people thought I was making some of this stuff up for some reason, Well, I certainly wasn't. I mean, I've never had pains like it. It was like knives in my shoulders. So they sent me to have an MRI scan. And to everybody's amazement, including me, I'd prolapsed pretty much all of the discs in my neck, and they'd burst, and they were wrapping around the nerves, which is why I was having pain in the shoulders and the arms and everything. So one immediate consequence was the people that I was working for said, "Steve, sorry, you're not fit for emergency response duties. So you've got two choices. We'll find you a desk job in London, or we'll let you go and there'll be a package to go with it." I didn't need to think about that. I knew that I wasn't going to stay in a desk job. I didn't know what on earth I was going to do, but I knew that I'd find something. And one of the things that I found was healing, was a form of healing. It's called Reconnective healing, and it's the baby of an American doctor, Dr. Eric Pearl. And I went to one of his talks one evening when he was in London. Thought, this is interesting. And then I signed up to do some training with him, which was interesting. And he taught me what I'm going to show you some later on in this show, how you can start to do some healing yourself. I'm going to demonstrate the techniques that I learned with Eric. And funnily enough, I did some refresher training last year when he was in Germany, just because I wanted to. But the point of the story here is that once you start moving up the levels of training in healing, you have to go and see a healer yourself, a reconnective healing practitioner who's at a fairly senior level, and they do the healing on you. Now, with all of this neck problem, it was just a replay of my previous back problem. As every month, year went by, I could do less and less. And the things that I enjoyed doing were being taken away from me. And I'd got to the stage where I was accepting that that's the way it's going to be. Anyway, I went to see this lady, and I went to see her twice for 1 hour each time. And after the second time, I had a big garden where I was staying then, and it was all overgrown because I couldn't do the gardening, and I couldn't find anybody I could pay to do it for me. So I thought, well, I'm going to put this to the test. And I went into the garden and I worked hard, whole day, manual labor. And whilst my muscles were stiff, I didn't have the pain that I'd had before. So I can't explain what that was, but I'm just giving you another example of the journey that I'd been on with healing. And because of that, I've also developed an interest in Chinese medicine. And obviously I'm still registered as a medical doctor, and I haven't thrown all the normal medical stuff out. There are just some things that I think Chinese medicine does better. One of the great things about Chinese medicine is that you only pay the doctor when you're well. When you get ill, the doctor accepts that he hasn't done his job or helped you to do your job. There's a lot of self-healing in Chinese medicine. And the more I think about diseases and the more I think about some of these alternative therapies that we've been talking about, is that conventional medicine, we treat the tip of the iceberg, what surfaces in front of us. If somebody has eczema, we give them a cream, or we give them steroids or something. But in a more holistic view of medicine, they would say, well, if somebody has a skin problem, then there's something underneath. And it might be dietary intolerance. Who knows? It could be stress. And so definitely in the work that I do now with people, I never take anything at face value. I see this when people come in, they will tell me what's the most obvious thing to them. And I'll listen very, very carefully. But then I'll want to probe to see what is underneath. And we know that meditation helps people. We know that heart math helps people. We know that havening can help people. We know that psychotherapy can help people. They don't help everybody, and they don't help some people all of the time, but they definitely have their uses. So what is the possible explanation for that? Well, my view, for what it's worth, and it helps to make my life simple, is that my work is to do with stress. and reducing stress. Because if we can reduce stress in people, we decrease their cortisol production. That's adrenaline, which is bad for people. We know that. We improve the balance between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic components of the autonomic nervous system that we discussed last week. We reduce muscle tension. We get people to sleep better. And that doesn't directly cure things like asthma and skin allergies and irritable bowel syndrome and cancer, but it helps. It helps all of those things. And the way that it helps is because I think that stress damages, destroys, impairs the immune system, which is the most powerful thing we have. And all of those things that I've said, anything you can do to reduce stress, to put balance back into people's lives is going to be good, which is what Hippocrates said. We all have a doctor. We just have to help it in its work. The natural healing force within each one of us is the greatest force in getting well. And the other thing is that when we make this mind change, when we reduce those stress levels, when we become more reflective and contemplative, it opens up parts of the unconscious mind that can speak to us for the first time. It's all in code. We don't get clear signal. We get things that we call instincts. We get intuition. We get goosebumps. We get hunches. We start to get lucky. I've written a book about that. What Carl Jung used to call synchronicities, and we'll definitely be talking about that in a future show. So it's this connection to the deeper levels of the brain that I think is where healing takes place. I don't think much healing goes on in the conscious mind. I don't have much faith in willpower, logic, all those kind of things. In some ways, they can make things worse. I had a couple of comments from people that, that when I asked them about their healing experiences. And one of them was Angela. It only just came in before the show, Angela, so I only read this very quickly. My apologies. But you gave me some very good examples of what you feel works and how you work in your practice. And you also said something at the end that I thought was very powerful. And I think it's definitely important that I share that with us all, including me. And that is, if my emotions are negative, I see that I can, if I'm not really careful, transfer that onto my client. And I think we all know that before you start treating anybody, you've got to get your head in the right place first. In fact, a common expression that therapists use is you have to go there first. You have to be prepared. You have to have prepared your mind to be balanced before you see your client, before you can do them justice, quite frankly. So that's a good point, Angela. There are some days when maybe, we all have bad hair days, some days where we should perhaps, do something else until we feel in a good place to work with other people. And Christine also wrote to me, and her note was really good. There was lots of really good stuff in that, and she has very bravely agreed that she will talk on the show. So are you there, Christine, somewhere?
Yes, I am. Hello, everyone.
There you are. And you've got a nice backdrop to your camera as well. Christine, I know a little bit about you. I know that you're a classical musician. You play the cello. I know that you have an eclectic career. You're a teacher. And I know that you're interested in the mind. And I know that you've trained as a master practitioner in NLP. And I know there's a lot of other stuff. What are you doing at the moment? Are you working with clients? Are you practicing some of these therapies?
Yes and no. I would say one of the hurdles I'm overcoming at the moment is I would call myself a semi-retired perfectionist. And that's taken me on quite a journey.
Well, it would. In fact, I would think it would be quite difficult to be semi-retired and to be a perfectionist. To me, I see a bit of a disconnect. So perhaps you're still, working through this one. But the people that you do work with, do you get any kind of feeling when things are going well? And
Yes,
the feeling that as therapists we don't like is we just know we're stuck, we're not getting anywhere.
yes, absolutely. The more in tune, sorry to use a pun, you are with it, you do connect with their energy. And I think the thing is not to try and to create a horizontal relationship rather than being one with all the power. And I like to think of it more like a seesaw where you can't get off the seesaw unless you're at a level. You're both, so if your client and practitioner are it's a balancing, exchanging of energies all the time, so that one can't be all powerful and the other one not, because you're learning from your client, and that exchange of energy creates the balance. So there are times, yes, one struggles to understand what's going on for them, but it's also very uplifting. You get to a place where you can get off the seesaw together, where that energy meets some sort of equilibrium, I suppose.
Well, that's a wonderful, I guess we would call that a metaphor, and things that are really difficult, and subjects like this are really difficult. Metaphors really work. The first thing I'd say to you, Christine, is you don't need to apologize for being in tune or whatever, because being in tune, being literal here for a change, that's a frequency, just like light. It's a modality, and we use these kind of words like, I really chimed with that person, or I really resonated with that person, or I was in tune with that person. That is coming, in my humble opinion, directly from your unconscious mind. And when you're working with a client, that's where you need to be. And I love the example of the seesaw, because it is definitely, when you're a therapist, it's definitely a two-way process. And um, when somebody comes into the room with you, they're probably going to be, quite wired. It's probably taking a lot of courage for them to get into the room. So the first thing that you do is you start talking a bit slower, and you start being a bit slower on the seesaw. And sooner or later, that person will resonate with you. You'll calm that person down for sure. There are ways to do that, and they work. So thank you very much for that, Angela and Christine. Now I think it's time really to cut to the meat. I'm a vegetarian, by the way, so that wasn't a very good example. We have an innate ability to heal ourselves. As a doctor, I've seen that all the time. No, I've seen that many times, clearly not all the time. But let me just give you a couple of examples. A very common finding at autopsy is to find in men cancer of the prostate, in women cancer of the breast. And those two things were normally not what killed them. In fact, they may have been totally unknown to the person, because our body is full of cancer cells and viruses and all these other things all the time. That's why we have an immune system. And that's why the best medicine that we can have is our own healthy immune system. And that's where I think we have a duty to put our efforts to help with all of the other things that Western and Chinese medicine can give us. So the trouble is that we kind of lose touch with these things. Doctors are losing touch, literally, with touching their patients. In the old days, it was about the only tool that a doctor would have: their compassion, their empathy, and their touch. Sometimes it was called the healing hands. Patients would say, "Oh, doctor, you've got healing hands." we can all feel this energy. So this is what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to hold your hands pretty much like this, with your fingers apart, pretty much like mine are. And they should not be too floppy. A good analogy here is to imagine that you're holding a baby in your arms, a small baby. So firm, but not too firm, but definitely not too soft, because otherwise the baby will slip between your hands. So just hold your hands still now and see what you feel. And close your eyes if you want to. You can keep your eyes open if you want to. It doesn't really matter. The thing that does matter is if your eyes are open, they must not be moving. Find something on your computer screen to stare at while you're doing this. And as far as possible, the rest of your body should be still. And a reminder here that we're always unaware of, we have something that moves a lot, and that is our tongue, even when we're not talking. So to try and keep everything still is actually a bit harder than it sounds. Now move your hands slightly further away. What do you feel? Now tip and tilt them a little bit. What do you feel? Move them backwards and forwards a little bit. In all of the therapies that I talk about, I rarely say, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to do, because your unconscious mind, your intuition is going to be a greater guide than mine. I never recommend learning recipes. Recipes are okay when you first learn to cook, but after a while, it's good to experiment with the ingredients a little bit, because that's where possibly the crack is and the light gets in. When should you do this? It's a bit like the other things I said. I'd do them every day, even if it's only once. How long should you do it for? If it's too long, it gets bored. If you're getting bored, it's too long. Healing, and therapists know this, healing can take place in a second. The trouble is, you don't know when that second is. When you're seeing a client, as soon as they come in the door, that healing can take place, or it could be the last thing they say when they leave your office. You never know. The only thing you have to think about is that sooner or later, there's a crack where the light gets in. You just don't know when it is. And another trap, I guess, that therapists fall into is they try and target the energy. If somebody says, they've got a migraine, they focus on the head. Or somebody's got a shoulder pain, they focus on the shoulder. That's logical. But it's much better, in my humble opinion, to let the energy find its target. Don't worry too much about which part of that body or that person where the energy goes. You can do this kind of thing on Zoom and Skype as well. You don't need to be in the same place as the other person. Now, obviously I'm on a small screen here, but feel free to move your hands as far apart as they will comfortably go. And I did mention that all these four monsters, they all work together. So if you can remember the heart math, try and do a little bit of heart math breathing at the same time. If you can't remember, don't worry. Just do think about your breathing. Just breathe a little deeper than you normally would, and a little slower than you normally would. And then think of a person that you would like to help, who's having a struggle at the moment. And if they're not with you, just imagine they are. Imagine they're sitting in front of you, and turn your hands towards them. So that's an introduction to healing, to self-healing, because you can do this on yourself. It will reduce your stress levels, like all those other things that I told you about. So healing yourself, healing other people. As far as I'm aware, nobody has ever injured another person just by having good thoughts about them and holding their hands away from their body. Have a look at Dr. Pearl's website. It's Reconnective Healing. He's got loads of videos. Like all of us who work in this field, we put a lot of stuff out for free. We put out lots of videos. You can learn a lot for nothing here. And you'll know whether you want to take it any further or not. Greg did explain, I haven't been able to look at my chat box while we've been talking. There's too many things going on my screen, and that's why it's really helpful to have Greg take care of that. But I know that there have been a few comments. Greg, is there anything there that oh, and this, by the way, is the opportunity for questions. I've finished what I wanted to say now. I probably forgot loads of stuff, but I'm more than happy to take questions right now. Do you have anything, Greg, at your side?
There's only one comment so far from Laura. No questions, so feel free, guys.
Could you say the name of that website again? Reconnective?
Reconnective Healing.
Yeah. Oh, that was tough, huh?
Dr. Eric Pearl.
I'm appreciating what you're saying, and I do believe that, because I was feeling a little bit of a state before we began today, as information comes in that leaves you in kind of a, with all of everything that's out there with all the virus and everything going on, and that feeling of helplessness that you get of not knowing. And so just understanding that coming from that place of letting the stress go to where you can actually think a little bit is very helpful.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, Angela. And that's what this show is for, really. It's not just for me to be talking. In fact, the more talking that other people do, the more it suits me. If you want to get worried about stuff, we have an infinite capacity in our mind to worry about it. We can come up with all kinds of things to worry about. But I find, as I get a little older and hopefully wiser, I worry about less and less stuff. I find that most problems actually seem to solve themselves. And I think this virus thing is going to solve itself, and it's already starting to improve. Now, this has been a huge emotional stress for so many people, and so many people have lost their lives. So I'm not in any way trivializing what's going on in the outside world. But we've been through these things before, and we'll go through them again. When I was a doctor in hospitals, we used to call influenza the old person's friend. It's a terribly callous thing to say, but it wasn't meant in that sense. But the fact is that when old people get frail, unfortunately, something will take them to the other side. And, that's what happens when there's influenza. But it will go away. There's nothing that I can do about it. For all I know, I could have this virus right now or get it tomorrow. There's nothing that I can, nothing for me to worry about. The only thing I need to focus on is the things that are in my control, which aren't very much. I can keep my head in a good place. I can eat good food. Fortunately, I'm lucky I have access to good food. Many people in the world don't. I'm fully aware of that. I can do my meditation, help to keep my immune system good. So yeah, there is an awful lot of stress out there. We're all feeling it in different ways. I mean, just being in lockdown is a huge stress for some people and some families, but it also has an upside. You know, we have more time to think, more time to do little projects and stuff like, stuff like these webinar shows. So thank you, Angela, and I'm glad your head's feeling a little bit better. And for you, I can see you on the top of my screen, you're even smiling now. I love to see people smiling. Smiling is very therapeutic. In fact, an old trick that people use with clients who, just find it really impossible to loosen up or to smile. You say, please smile. If you knew what I was going through, you'd never say that. Okay, hold this pencil for me. Funny thing is, I'm not joking. Those face muscles, they're wired to the brain, some part of the brain. And after about 10 seconds, people do start smiling. After about 30 seconds, they say, can I take the pencil out of my mouth now? Do we have any other questions? Do you want to know what we're going to talk about next week? Yeah, no, want a surprise? Somebody said, yeah, okay. I'm going to give a little hint. This isn't for certain yet, but we might be talking about hypnosis because I've got some rather unusual views on hypnosis. What I can tell you is that you are surrounded by hypnosis in modern life. In fact, in all life. It's a form of communication that people have always used. It's a bit like a frequency thing. Hopefully we're going to have a chance to talk about frequencies because light's a frequency, I've mentioned that. Back to your boring physics, the electromagnetic spectrum, if you can remember that. In the middle is light. That's the only bit of that electromagnetic spectrum that we know about. On one side, you've got all these long radio waves. On the other side, you've got all these ionizing radiations and dangerous stuff like that. Now, there's all kinds of things going on in our universe that we just don't have the sensors for. We don't know. All we can see is the visible light. But what about if there's a bit of a crack and a bit more light can get in? So we might be, we'll be talking about that and preparing ourselves for the next, as far as ahead as my thoughts have gone so far, the bits about intelligence, infinite intelligence and the unconscious mind. Because when I work with peak performers, once they get out of their own way, good things happen. They perform better, but other good things seem to happen as well. And my clients will know the word synchronicity. We use synchronicities a lot, and I'll explain where that comes from. I don't see any other questions. So in that case, I do hope to see you next week. A recording of this show will be available on YouTube within a couple of days or so. And when I send out the invitations next week, I will put the link to that. In the meantime, stay well, stay as happy and healthy as you can, stay as immune as you can, and feel free to contact me at any time if you have any questions between shows. So for now, goodbye.